Thank you again so much for being here in person this morning and online. We're really grateful that y'all have taken time out of your busy lives to come hear some of the remarkable work that these remarkable human beings have produced. My name is Leah Lane. For those of you guys I haven't met, I'm the curator of the Mesda collection. So I've had the honor of working with these amazing fellows for the last 4 weeks. And I also have the honor of introducing our next speakers. Emily Whitted will not be joining us in person today. She had a family emergency come up, and so she will be joining us via recording. But I'm so glad that we've been able, COVID did some good things, and that we are able to link across time and space. Emily is a PhD candidate in history at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She's also a graduate of the Winter program. And her fellowship was provided by the South Carolina Silver Society. So again, we're grateful for the large community of folks who have made it possible for us to bring all of these scholars here today. Her talk is entitled Wealth from the Water, Murky Metal in the Shadow of the Santee River. Press play and it's going to work and it's going to be beautiful.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Whitted, and thank you all so much for tuning into my presentation today, which is titled Wealth from the Water, Murky Metal in the Shadow of the Santee River, 1785 to 2003. The year is 2002, and for South Carolinians, there's only one thing on their minds: water. It was the 4th year in a row of a devastating drought, which would soon prove one of the worst in history of the state. Crops suffered, trees died, lakes and rivers shrunk, and hydroelectric projects struggled while residents waited for rain. But for some, exposed stretches of ground normally underwater were not signs of destruction, but instead an opportunity for new discoveries. In the shrunken wetlands near Utah Springs, just south of a man-made body of water called Lake Marion, South Carolina, a digger noticed the strange gleam of a mysterious shiny object emerging from the mud. Buried treasure? The silver and gold piece was dug from the mud, conserved, entered the Mesda collection in 2003, and is now here on the screen for your viewing pleasure, infinitely cleaner, but still utterly mysterious. Initially cataloged as a stock buckle, this silver object is roughly 2 inches in height with a gold diamond attached to its center, engraved with the initials CP. Highly decorated with pierced holes and engraved designs on the front, the back reveals a maker's mark that reads Mood stamped into the metal, as well as a thin curved closure that originally held a rusted piece of steel pen. Made in the shop of Peter Mood Sr., a Charleston silversmith working between 1785 and 1816, this object is the fragment of a clasp or closure, a metal piece that would have skillfully connected 2 separate entities together. Crafted with highly valuable materials, it must have been a prized piece for a wealthy elite South Carolinian, but neither the identities of its former owners nor its specific uses are obvious to us at first glance. It was also discovered in a highly manipulated landscape where rice and cotton plantations sprawled in working relationship with water from the Santee River and subsequently the Santee Canal. But much of its history now lies at the bottoms of Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie, 2 massive hydroelectric projects created in 1941. In my talk today, we're going to get more acquainted with some possibilities of my object's past life before it entered a muddy resting place, as well as its initial creation. But ultimately, I argue that the circumstances of its rediscovery in the ebbing waters of the former Santee River emphasizes the direct connections between manipulated waterways and material wealth for a planter class who could afford a highly personalized and valuable clasp, but would not live to see many of their vast estates that produce this wealth submerged in the 20th century. Working with material fragments is an exercise in imagination. Contextualizing this object's history required comparative analysis with surviving whole pieces of material culture to narrow down what it could be, but also cross-referencing that with the location it was found, the materials used to make it, as well as its makers and its possible owners. Preliminary examination of the object explored the accuracy of its cataloging as a stock buckle, which is a metal buckle used to fasten a fine piece of linen fabric known as a stock around the neck as part of 18th century men's attire. Those comparisons suggested that a stock buckle was actually a very unlikely candidate, in part due to the lack of a clear fastening on Mazda's object to the stock itself, which was normally done by 3 or 4 buttons, which you can see on the examples here on the screen. But this object was certainly a fastening or a clasp of some sort. Clasps can range from the most sophisticated metal closures to very simple hooks, but were parts of a whole in a broader practice of personal adornment in the early Republic. One possibility, perhaps, for this particular clasp was a fastening for a piece of jewelry, like a necklace or a bracelet. Simultaneously objects of fashion and intense personal meaning, jewelry signified status and wealth through highly decorative objects made of visible precious materials, such as silver, gold, or gemstones. The combination of silver and gold seen in this clasp is also much more uncommon in early America, but when seen, is usually found on pieces of jewelry. In Charleston, silversmiths producing jewelry found a ready market, free from sumptuary laws in areas like New England, which would have curbed this level of adornment. Charlestonians were eager to spend their masses of wealth on these visible displays. Even after the Revolutionary War, when Charleston's wealth had dissipated slightly, there was still plenty of demand. Rings, bracelets, brooches, hairwork, and necklaces graced the wrists and the necks of Charleston's wealthiest residents. Beyond motivations of fashion, jewelry often signified more personalized meaning for its wearers. Death and loss were powerful experiences in early America, and jewelry could signify the individuals who had been lost and kept close to the body through its wearing. One literal version of this practice was the wearing of portrait miniatures as jewelry, which this clasp is not dissimilar to in scale. And you can see an example of this practice as depicted in Charles Peel Polk's portrait of Mary Riddle on the left of the screen. If connected to a death or a loss of a loved one, this clasp initials could also take on new meaning as part of a larger practice of mourning jewelry. Another possibility is that this object is a book clasp or catch, which were a series of hooked, sometimes decorated metal pieces used to keep books closed as they tended to spring open over time. Similar in shape to some extant book clasps, this object also has a series of holes potentially made for rivets, which would have pierced through the leather or the fabric cover of the book and fixed it to place. While not all book clasps or catches are made of precious metals, the materials of this clasp imbue it with a certain level of conspicuous wealth, but also would have communicated the value of the book to which it was affixed to its owner, possibly to a copy of the Bible or the Common Book of Prayers. For example, clasps can be seen on this 1743 early American printing of the Bible in German by Christopher Sower. This clasp was found in and around large tracts of 18th century land owned by the Porcher family, a sprawling South Carolinian family descended from French Huguenots with immense wealth generated from enslaved labor on their plantations close to the Santee River. On this map, the rough area of the clasp's discovery is marked with a star, while each rectangle represents a piece of Porcher family property. Enmeshed in both Charleston high society and the communities of St. John's and St. Stephen's parishes, a member of the Porcher family is the most likely candidate for owning this particular clasp, especially given the engraved initials CP. Based on genealogical information and the window of time in which this object was produced, 2 Porcher family members in particular are possibly linked to this object. Catherine Cordes Porcher, who lived from 1767 to 1833, and her son, Charles Cordes Porcher, who lived from 1801 to 1877. Catherine was the wife of Philip Porcher Jr., who managed multiple plantations along the Santee River, but primarily resided at Oldfield Plantation. For their 3 sons who would live to adulthood, Philip, Thomas, and Charles, Porcher Jr. developed plantations. as his father, Philip Porcher Sr., had done for him and his brothers in the area years prior. For Charles, he built Lawson's Pond Plantation, which is pictured here on the right, just north of Cross, South Carolina, and possibly included Charles in the process of construction plans and plantation management prior to Philip's death in 1817. If this clasp had belonged to Charles, perhaps as a book clasp for his own personal copy of the Bible, this object's creation could have signified his entry to adulthood and the responsibilities of managing his own plantation as his father's health declined. If this clasp had been owned by Catherine, his mother, it certainly could also have been a book clasp, but it might also have been a clasp for a necklace. It could have entered her possession as a wedding gift when she married Philip in 1788, marking a major transition in her life. Wearing such a clasp might have reminded her of her new status in the eyes of the law, as well as the combined wealth of their union, but also the responsibilities that came with marrying Philip, including the management of household affairs and the enslaved men and women within that household. The Porcher family's extensive plantations by the Santee River were not their only holdings, and other properties in Charleston would have placed them in close proximity to talented local artisans and luxury imported goods for purchase in this urban setting. Despite the city's many silversmiths from which to choose, totaling 211 between 1690 and 1860, a member of the Porcher family placed their order for their custom clasp at the shop of Peter Mood Sr. at 223 King Street. I've highlighted King Street here on this map for you, who had arrived in Charleston from Philadelphia in 1785 and advertised as a silversmith and goldsmith, first solely under his own name until 1816, and then jointly with his sons until his death in 1821. The son of German immigrant Johann Peter Muth, Peter was born in Oxford Township, Pennsylvania, and after the death of his father during the Revolutionary War, likely apprenticed with other silversmiths before beginning his own practice in Charleston and marrying Mary Dorothy Sigwald in 1787. Together, they raised 8 children, 4 of whom would become silversmiths in their own time. Descriptions of Peter Mood Sr.'s no-nonsense approach to thieves shone brightly in Mood family memories. On one occasion, a man entered the shop, asked to look at finger rings, and slipped one into his mouth in an attempt to make off with the ring undetected. To the thief's great surprise, Mood immediately punched him in the jaw with such force that the ring popped out of his astonished mouth. In another, a man tried to slip a ring down his shirt, but was dragged to the back of the shop and ordered to strip until the ring had been safely retrieved. These stories, as well as this portrait of Mood Sr. by a now unknown artist in a private collection, give us a sense of Peter's character. But these family stories also emphasize the amount of jewelry he was selling in his shop, adding to the range of objects he was producing for customers, including some of his better-known silver pieces now in collections like the Charleston Museum, and I've also highlighted 2 pieces here on the screen for you. On the left is a chatelaine made by Peter Mood Sr., and on the right is a cream pitcher. Among the inventory of his tools and shop equipment, various hammers, anvils, punches, soldering irons, and, quote, a 6-inch flatting mill for rolling metals into sheets, all could have contributed to the making of this silver and gold clasp. Mood Sr. was also a member of the German Friendly Society, a fraternal organization and charitable aid society for German residents in Charleston that placed him in proximity with some of the most talented artisans in the city and bonded him with other Germans looking to assimilate and educate their own children. Peter Mood's change in spelling of his last name, Muth, to Mood is likely reflective of this assimilation. He was also part of St. John's Lutheran Church, which had close ties to the German Friendly Society and much overlap between members. His German identity and Lutheran faith did not, however, prevent entanglements between his family members and the institution of slavery in South Carolina, or prevent the use of that labor within their own households. While there is no direct evidence that enslaved labor was used inside the workshop of Peter Mood Sr., 1820 census records notes 2 enslaved women between the ages of 26 and 45, and 1 enslaved girl under the age of 14 within his household. During his lifetime, the Lutheran Church's stance on slavery was relatively accepting. His son, John Mood, however, also a silversmith, converted to Methodism, which had a much more anti-slavery message among their congregation. But 1850 census records for his household also note the presence of 7 enslaved people. And he also received contracts from the city in 1832, 1835, 1841, and 1844 to produce the city's slave badges, which were copper tags issued yearly to enslaved laborers who were hired out by their enslavers. As part of personal practice and economic decision-making, the Mood family, as well as the silver and gold clasps made by Mood Sr., were entrenched in the broader system of Atlantic world slavery that built and maintained Charleston. Once the silver and gold clasp had left Mood Sr.'s workshop and entered the possession of the customer, this item would have been scrutinized as a socially appropriate item of wealth acceptable for only white owners. This advertisement here on the screen, which was placed in the Charleston City Gazette on November 15th, 1820, reads, quote, "Stopped from a person of color, a silver tablespoon. The owner can have it by applying to Peter Mood Jr., number 159 King Street, and paying for this advertisement." The seizure of a silver tablespoon from a person of color's possession, regardless of whether they were free or unfree, emphasizes that racialized assumptions about the identities of proper owners of silver pieces were pervasive in Charleston during this period. While the object this clasp fragment originally belonged to could have been cleaned or fastened by black hands, white hands would always be associated with the object's ownership and policed accordingly. And yet it is a direct result of Black enslaved labor that the Porcher family could afford such a clasp in the first place. For the Porchers and every other planter family on the Santee River, their massive wealth originated from the successful growing of rice and cotton, both of which were highly dependent on enslaved labor to manipulate and control perhaps the most critical factor in agriculture, water. And controlling water, by extension, required the moving of mud. The area along the Santee River, named for the indigenous group who resided there long before white planters, was primarily a series of freshwater swamps and ideally suited for rice plantations. But the landscape first needed a large amount of manipulation, and this was done exclusively with enslaved labor, forcibly utilizing their technical knowledge of West African rice growing traditions. Miles of dikes were built with wooden sluice gates, one of which is pictured here on the screen in the collection of the Charleston Museum, to control the entry of water into the rice fields, which all had to be leveled to similar elevations and sectioned off into usable squares, regardless of existing landscape features like trees or streams. It was backbreaking, muddy, exhausting work, and all required regular maintenance. Rice plantations soon gave way to cotton plantations in the area beginning in 1793. Porcher family members transitioned their plantations to growing Santee long cotton, which is another form of long staple cotton not grown specifically on the Sea Islands, but still much more valuable than short staple cotton. For the growing of cotton, it was more important to keep water out than to keep it in. Water was a threat to the fields if rapid flooding of the river due to heavy rains known as freshets overwhelmed the crop. The product of these cotton plantations eventually would make their way to spaces like Charleston, but the Santee River and the Cooper River did not naturally connect, requiring clunky overland travel on poorly maintained roads. As early as 1770, a canal project was proposed, but a little event called the Revolutionary War paused this proposal from developing further until 1786, when the project was chartered, with the intention of connecting the Santee and the Cooper through a 22-mile-long canal with 2 double locks and 8 single locks, which also happened to directly cut through Porcher plantation lands for ease of transport. Construction of the canal relied exclusively on hired out enslaved men and women, and their numbers rose to over 1,000 during peak construction years. The canal lock walls and floors were also paved with local bricks, also made with enslaved labor. The redirection of water due to the Santee Canal boosted planters in the area who now had speedier ways to send their harvested crops to market, usually on boats crewed by 6 or 7 enslaved boatmen. At every stage of this landscape's transformation into a profitable agricultural area with multiple projects devoted to water management, enslaved labor made this management possible. To mitigate the threat of water, large embankments without sluice gates were built for cotton plantations. Major Samuel Porcher, a relative of some of the Porchers we've been discussing already, who lived on Mexico Plantation, ordered the construction of a 4¼ mile long embankment, so large it would appear on maps labeled Porcher's embankment. Described here on the screen in the words of Edmund Ruffin in his private diary in 1843, Ruffin describes the physical parameters of this embankment, the length and the height, the amount of acreage it protects. But I want to draw your attention to the final line in bold, which reads, "This is one of the greatest private works known, and is the more remarkable as being the work of one individual, and who was sustained by no encouragement of concurrent opinion or hope of other persons." While in the eyes of Ruffin, this project might have been the work of Porcher alone, the project was completed by some unknown number of the over 400 enslaved men and women listed as part of Porcher's estate in 1851, and their names are here on the screen. Beginning in 1939, this landscape was once again manipulated, and this time irreversibly, by the Santee Cooper project, a massive hydroelectric development that created Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie right over the plantation landscape, so integral to our understanding of the silver and gold class and the labor behind it. Highly controversial at the time, it flooded a number of major historical plantation sites, including both homes and extant outbuildings, as well as a variety of communities populated by Black sharecroppers and their descendants who built spaces of their own in the aftermath of emancipation and the conclusion of the Civil War. Some of this built environment was salvaged, like the architectural features of Whitehall Plantation, which are here on the screen and were owned by Thomas Porcher and now are in the collection at Mesda. But many buildings not deemed, quote, historically significant by the 1939 Waterman Report were destroyed or submerged. In this instance, water was a weapon of erasure, leaving us without a variety of historical information about not only these plantation spaces, but also a number of Black communities and workplaces, which could have further enriched our historical knowledge. Perhaps due to the hydroelectric project of the 1940s, or perhaps many years prior, like so many other small personal objects, this item was lost. But it is ultimately thanks to water that this clasped fragment was found, and it is in Mesda's collection today. Water can reveal as much as it can conceal. Despite the murkiness that remains around this object's intended owners and uses, it is through water's long legacy in this landscape that we can begin to understand and appreciate the historical significance of the silver and gold fragment buried in the mud. And every year, fluctuating climate conditions cause volatile changes in our weather and our water levels. Perhaps at another low tide, water will offer another material remnant of past life in the shadow of the Santee River. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Emily. I assume you're watching today. So